You just always have to throw that in.
You see the government watering people down in Washington, and you see them. Never mind.
Don't even get into it.
Come on over, David Dorsey, our final guest of episode number 116. The sun's starting to come out. David Dorsey works for the Fort Myers News Press, and he's here to talk about his book. David, how are you?
Hey,
thanks
great.
for waiting in the wings there. We appreciate you coming out in the weather.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I did bring a copy of Fourth Down in Dunbar.
Nice.
And I wrote it with a long shelf life in mind. I don't promote it that much anymore, but it's Father's Day is coming up.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of dads out there that like sports. And the cover guy, Sammy Watkins, just won a Super Bowl with the Kansas City Chiefs. So
nice.
I think it's time for people to learn more about the NFL players that grew up in Fort Myers.
When did you write it?
It was published in 2014.
Okay.
And at the time, Sammy Watkins was just heading to Clemson University. He was a star, one of the biggest stars to come out of Fort Myers. And now he's nearly world famous. Yeah.
Right. And you open up the book talking about a visit that you made to Deion Sanders.
Yeah. So
which was pretty
back
cool.
in 2011, Deion grew up on the corner of Henderson Avenue and Michigan Court. And Deion was really kind of put a spotlight on Fort Myers. And it was in 2011, he went to the Hall of Fame, and I was able to follow him most of that year. And I spent about 2 hours with him in his home.
And you're driving around in his SUVs, and you're watching him do business, and that was pretty cool.
He was actually my chauffeur during that trip to Dallas.
And your biggest worry was, I think, that you were afraid he wasn't going to answer the door. You went all the way out there on the news press's dime, and he didn't answer the door. So you thought, "Oh crap, he was playing me."
Frightening because I convinced my bosses to fly me out to Texas, and I get all the way out there. And I get to this front gate, and the driveway is maybe half a mile long.
Good for him.
And I just sat there. I'm ringing the doorbell. And I'm texting him. I'm trying to call him. And his wife at the time, she finally showed up. But she's like, "Who are you?" And I'm like, "I'm David Dorsey. I'm with the News Press, and I'm working on this book." And she said, "Well, he didn't tell you he had a root canal this morning." And all the while, I'm getting all these texts from my bosses back at the News Press, and they're like, "How's it going out there?" And I'm like sweating,
It's going great
at all.
Like no pressure. Can you guys leave me alone? I just got here. Sorry about the $600 flight expense.
All right. Well, that's an interesting neighborhood, Dunbar. I mean, the way you write about it, football or drugs.
Yeah, and one of the things that I wanted to make clear when you read the book is that Dunbar is not one neighborhood. Dunbar is a collection of neighborhoods, and each neighborhood within Dunbar kind of has its own personality. Just like if you're going up and down McGregor Boulevard or throughout different parts of Lee County, those are different neighborhoods too. It became known as Dunbar because in 1969, when the school system was desegregated, the kids started going to the white schools. And the white kids were like, "Oh, those are the kids from Dunbar," meaning Dunbar High. And then it just sort of caught on as the whole community was known as Dunbar.
Gotcha. So you were somewhere last night. I mean, it's kind of like almost coming together with the book and the timing of the book.
It was weird timing last night because I did cover the protest march and the rally in downtown Fort Myers for the paper. And, I interviewed a handful. You can't interview 600, 700 people.
Right.
But one of the young men I interviewed, he was directly connected to 3 of the people in the book.
No kidding.
Yeah, he played high school football with Ernest Graham. He was a cousin of Javon Curse. He was also related somehow distantly to Philip Buchanan.
Mm-hmm.
And so, a lot of the themes in Fourth Down in Dunbar were playing out on the streets of Fort Myers last night.
What did you think of what you witnessed last night?
Well, I was, I've been to the Martin Luther King parade before, but I've never seen anything like this in Fort Myers where, March for Equality, where that really went out of the Dunbar community and marched down McGregor Boulevard to the Edison home, marched down US 41 to Lee Memorial Hospital. So that was definitely interesting.
It's incredible how many great players came out of Dunbar and either made it to the NFL or played well in college and got a shot at the NFL. You don't see a lot of that from one
No,
small
you don't.
community
And
like this.
there's some high schools over on the other coast, like St. Thomas Aquinas in Fort Lauderdale. At one point they had 14 active NFL players.
Wow.
But at Fort Myers, you got to look at these kids all went to different high schools
Right.
because after 1969, the school district carved the Dunbar community into a pie. So what street and what neighborhood you lived in within Dunbar determined what high school you would go to. So you could have some cases where a kid living on one side of the street would go to North Fort Myers High, and a kid right across the street would go to Fort Myers
Riverdale.
High.
Mhm.
Kid down the way would go to Mariner High. Kid down the other way would go to Cape Coral High, Cypress Lake High. So that was just different to where you had all these kids from 1-2 mile square radius going to 8 or 9 different high schools.
Wow. So
Is there one high school that's kind of produced more, or is it
No,
pretty equal?
no, it's just spread out.
Yeah.
Because Ernest Graham went to Mariner, Philip Buchanan went to Lehigh, Terrence Cody went to Riverdale, Jamie German went to Fort Myers High.
Wow,
So
yeah.
spread out.
one of the things I think you're right about is that there was a lot of drug activity going on back
Yes.
in the early.
Yes.
I don't know what's going on now, but at least in the book you wrote about that, about how the people that were dealing drugs almost kind of protected the football players because they knew that was their way out. They were great athletes.
Yes, and in the mid '80s, the crack cocaine epidemic was really hit Fort Myers hard. Crack, like in its purest form, kind of originated in Fort Myers.
I was when you wrote that, I didn't know that at all.
Yeah, they
Wow.
used to call us Cracktown, USA. That was the
Wow.
nickname back in the mid '80s. And one of the tougher interviews for me to get for Fourth Down in Dunbar was Ronnie Tate, and he was sentenced to life in prison for selling crack. And I ended up going to Coleman Correctional Facility in northern Florida, and I met with him in prison. And it was interesting because the week that Fourth Down in Dunbar was published, Ronnie Tate was released.
Wow.
He's now a real estate agent in Cape Coral. So
No
there you
kidding.
go.
What was it like going to a prison to interview somebody?
Yeah, so that was actually my second time going to that prison for Fourth Down in Dunbar because Ernest Graham's brother, Brandon, was also at the same prison. But I had forgotten that I was wearing a pair of khaki slacks. And they're like, no, we can't let you in wearing khaki slacks. And I'm like, why? And they said, well, it's the same color as the inmates wear.
So if
they
you get
wouldn't-
in, you might not get out.
So I had to find the nearest Walmart, and I bought a pair of blue jeans, and then I had to circle back and go back in, and then they let me in to
Wow.
interview.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
But I mean, did you feel like unsafe when you went around? I mean,
it's intimidating with
Yeah.
the barbed wire, like unlike anything I've ever seen. But once it's a little intimidating. Like, are they going to let me out after I walk back inside? After I go inside. But
Not with those khakis on.
but once I got inside, it wasn't that intimidating because there's families visiting families.
Okay.
So
Sorry about the flies. I don't
Yeah,
know what
no,
that's
right.
all about.
Well,
But
it's the weather. Now, I read a few of the stories. I didn't read all of them.
That's okay.
But, some of them had not so great. I mean, they came out, then they did well, and then kind of struggled.
yeah. So one of the themes in Fourth Down in Dunbar is a lot of the children growing up in the Dunbar community are coming from single parent homes. They don't have a father in their life. And I think if I wrote about 18 chapters about 16 guys, maybe only one of them grew up in a 2-parent home.
Wow.
And so, that provides some challenges that kids coming from a 2-parent home aren't going to face. And some of those challenges kind of creep up after they get out of the NFL, and all of a sudden they're not applauded all the time. So,
what do you think about what's going on now? What you see going on in the country?
well, I mean, I think we're just seeing people and African Americans are just fed up with treatment unequal treatment from police, and that's we saw in the 8-minute video with George Floyd. That just was kind of like the last straw. I'll veer away for a minute on 4th Down and Dunbar, but I interviewed some experts on some of these mass protests and uprisings for an article that we ran today. They told me these things usually die out 5 to 6 days after the genesis of what triggers them. And here we are almost 14 days later, and they're still happening.
Yeah, seemed like some are getting stronger.
Yeah, so this is different. This is different than anything I've seen in my lifetime, and I was born in 1972.
And that article's in the News Press today, newspress.com, or you pick up the paper wherever it is. Great. Yeah. And you also have the story about the protests from last night, right? So
that's online, and that ended pretty late for our deadline. But I followed the march and interviewed the marchers. And
were you worried about even reporters have been getting pelted around the country? Did you
that crossed my mind. I did wear a mask. There were some mask wearers. I'm still hopefully we're all well right here, close quarter.
Right.
Yep.
But so that was definitely on my mind too, the coronavirus threat. But the Fort Myers Police Department, they've been praised by the protesters for keeping their distance and for letting them do what they want to do, which is just spread their message.
Right. Well, we also, I watched, I don't know what video I watched where, I don't even know what town it was in, but they were breaking into a Wells Fargo somewhere with sledgehammers. And thankfully that's not going on around here like it is in other parts of the country. So in some areas it's getting crazy. In Minneapolis or Minnesota, it seems like they're burning that city down. So it's nice to see the police department that has had some issues in the past is getting praised, because that's good news.
And we've had some NFL players from here have run-ins with the police, and Nate Allen being a guy. Nate Allen's not much in 4th Down and Dunbar, but he ended up getting paid $440,000 for a wrongful arrest a few years back.
Yep, I remember that. Yeah. So we're talking to David Dorsey from the Fort Myers News Press. Where can people find the book, pick up the book?
So 4th Down and Dunbar, you can get it on Amazon.com. You can get it at Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. Here in Fort Myers, the Edison Home Bookstore has some signed copies in their gift shop.
Cool. So, I didn't know Barnes & Noble and Books A Million were still around.
Yeah, they're still around. They're thriving, and they're just starting to reopen now.
Oh, okay, cool. So how do you like working for a newspaper? Is that, have you worked there you worked there a very long time.
Yeah, so I got to Fort Myers in 1994, right out of the University of Kansas. I'm a Jayhawk. I almost wore a Jayhawk t-shirt.
That would have been fun.
But
you don't hear that much around here. It's usually Ohio State or
Right.
Michigan State. So
I was supposed to be here on a 3-month internship.
Oh.
And they kept extending the internship. And then, okay, well, we'll keep you another month, and then I was an intern for like 6 or 7 months. And then,
wow.
And finally in 1995, they hired me full time, and I covered Charlotte County for the News Press. And I was the last full-time beat writer for Charlotte County. Then in the fall of 95, they had an opening in sports, and they asked me, hey, do you want to quit covering Charlotte County and write about sports? And I'm like,
oh yeah, how nice is that? So football or all sports?
I covered everything, spring training, and then my assignments covering high school football kind of started feeding the book. And I also covered the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for 3 seasons, and 3 of the guys in the book played for the Bucs. So Ernest Graham and Philip Buchanan and Greg Spires. So that they kind of fed off of each other, the newspaper stories and reporting for the book. And then 3 years ago, I started writing about real estate stuff.
Thanks, Roxanne. She's going to buy a book today, she said. So there you go. Very nice. She's texted that she's going to buy your book.
Yeah.
So,
And there's
she's
a
going
lot of
online.
history
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
there
So
as well.
what was the biggest thing for you about writing a book? I mean, not about that book, but I mean, how hard is it, or was it
How disciplined do
thrilling,
you have
or
to be?
Yeah, so it's most writers, that's kind of their dream, or a lot of people sit around like, I want to write a novel, but then they talk about it but never do it.
I hear you.
And it took me a long time. It took me I started I think right around 08, I'm like, hey, I think I could write a book about these guys. And, it wasn't published until 2014.
Took a while.
I'm a very fast writer when it comes to, like, last night.
News stories.
I covered the rally for 2 hours, and I spent 30 minutes writing a 800-word story,
Yeah.
lickety split.
Yeah.
But the book thing, it's more in depth.
You got to go do interviews. You got to go through the interview
There's
tape.
more to
and all
tie
that.
together. I wanted it to be original. I didn't want to just rehash all my newspaper stories.
Gotcha.
But then then writing the book is like the easy part. It's getting published. That's the hard
No
part.
kidding.
And I did not get what I wanted. Everyone wants the big New York City publisher, and I wanted to be at the front of the Barnes and Noble or Books a Million. Right. I wanted to be the number one on the Amazon algorithm.
Mm-hmm.
That didn't happen, and I'm like, but the good news is I didn't have to pay any money to publish the book. I didn't have to self-publish. I found the University Press of Florida. They ran that through they have a vetting process. It's not like they publish just any book.
Right.
They have a committee. They read it and they talk about it. Then they will this sell. We've sold 2/3 of what was printed, so I think they're happy with the outcome.
Cool.
And Father's Day. Come on, guys.
Yeah.
You got a football fan in your life, or even a history fan, because there's a lot of history in the book.
Would you do it again? Would you write another book?
I'm working on 2 right now.
2. You
don't
took you 6 years to write 1. Why are you writing 2 at a time? Come on.
I'm at the I got the light at the end of the tunnel for a novel I'm working on.
Oh, what's it about?
I can't tell you that yet.
Oh, okay.
Well, I'll come back on. Though.
All right. Yeah.
And then
It's a
I
deal.
got another sports book in the works too. So.
Has everybody? I'm assuming that everybody is alive or isn't alive. I'm not really sure that you wrote out in the book, but everybody that is, have they read it?
Yeah. Pompey Green's the oldest man in the book, and he's approaching 90 years old now, and he lives over in Fort Lauderdale. But he graduated from Dunbar High School in 1949.
Wow.
And he was one of the first 3 athletes from Fort Myers, black athletes from Fort Myers, to get college football scholarships. And that kind of began the wave.
Yeah. You write about how hard it was to get scholarships at the beginning of the book, and now how things have changed, but still they haven't changed enough. But has Dion read the book?
I don't know. I know he's seen it. He knows about it, obviously. I don't know if he's read it or not. And
what about Sammy?
Sammy, I know Sammy's family's read the book. I can tell you that for a fact.
These guys are so darn
Sammy,
busy.
Last time I went about 7 years without seeing Sammy Watkins in person. Obviously, I watched him on TV, but earlier this year, Lee County honored Sammy with like a day in his honor.
Yeah.
And I was able to go and catch up with him, and it was
cool.
kind of fun. And he signed that book right there.
Did you record the catching up you had for a
did not do
podcast
that.
at some point?
No,
that would have been great.
We can't add it to the podcast.
Well, David, thanks so much for coming all the way down here and talking about the book. And we'll make sure that we post up there where people can get it. Anything else you want to tell us about? Well,
really, I just appreciate the audience that you're building here on your podcast.
Thank you.
And I hope to continue my audience. I am on Twitter at David A. Dorsey. And if anyone has a question about any news stories here in Fort Myers Beach, email me at ddorsey@news-press.com.
And also on Facebook. You're on Facebook.
And I'm on Facebook. And I'll actually be down here this coming week to write about the latest in the Margaritaville stuff.
Oh, yeah. That's coming up on Monday. I guess the oral arguments will be live on Monday if they have them. So that'll be huge news down here.
Yeah, and if you make it, even bigger than you are now, and you need a third co-host,
okay,
I'm available for that too.
I take a lot of time off in the summer, so
Yeah,
we might need somebody to fill in.
David Dorsey, everybody. Thanks, David.
Thank
It's
you
called
so
Fourth
much.
Down in Dunbar. You can go on Amazon and get it right now, or stop at your favorite bookstore where you like to pick up a nice fresh cup of coffee.
That's right.
David,
Hey,
thanks so much.
I forgot to tell you one cool
No worries.
thing.
Go
I don't know
right
if
on.
You have time?
Yeah.
Go ahead. We
Okay.
always.
He brought envelopes, so he's going to the envelope. He's got a letter.
I brought a letter, and look who it's from.
Wow, your favorite.
George Bush.
George Bush, the 43rd president of the United States, read Fourth Down in Dunbar.
No kidding.
And he sent me that letter of thanks, and that's his.
How come you don't have this framed? How come you
authentic?
still have it?
Well, I wanted to show it to you.
Nice.
guys, but
Maybe there
I
you
don't know if
go.
people
Very
can see it
nice.
right
Yeah,
here,
they
but
can.
I wonder how he came across your book. Like,
I sent it to him.
oh, okay.
And I had
That's
a.
how.
Yeah, I had a connection because his family has spent a lot of time in Lee County and Boca Grande, especially.
Oh, that's right.
And
Mrs.
his
Bush,
mother,
yeah,
Barbara Bush's Literacy Foundation. They did an annual event in Bonita for many years, Bonita Springs at the Hyatt. And I knew a guy who could get President Bush the book. So
I'm hoping to get Trump on the show. I mean, he seems to go on any show that is on the air. I mean, he calls every radio host.
I don't have the connection to him that I did for W.
Well, that's pretty cool. I
That is
love that
cool.
president. So
Yeah.
thanks a lot, David,
Thank
for
you
sharing
so
that.
much.
And
Thanks for having me on.
bringing the book. And do you want to? Okay, great. And get it on Amazon, folks. It's called Fourth Down in Dunbar. David Dorsey writes for the Fort Myers News Press, so check him out. He's got an article in there today. He's got an article on the website from the rally last night in Fort Myers, and we appreciate him coming down and sharing his book with us.
Yeah, that was